Hello and welcome back to Level Up with Loraine. Today's special guest is none other than Nancy Chakabuda, and we will be talking about building an authentic personal brand. So a bit about Nancy. She is a transformational leader with a passion for positively influencing organizational change, coaching, and people development. She has a demonstrated background in effective leadership and development of diverse and global teams in a multinational environment. Nancy is currently a senior director for the Global Center of Accounting at a Fortune 500 US multinational company. Her experience spans over 15 years in risk management, corporate governance, internal controls, accounting, and finance. She currently lives in the United States of America in Indianapolis with her husband. Education-wise, she's a CA, she's a chartered accountant, and she also holds an MBA from Gibbs and is currently busy with her doctorate in business administration with the University of Edinburgh, UK. She's also a SICA 35 under 35 finalist and winner of the LEAD Award in 2020. And lastly, Nancy enjoys volunteer work and serves on the board of Chartered Accountants Worldwide Network, USA, as vice president. She's involved with a number of employee resource groups as lead, co-lead in her organization, including formal and informal mentorships. She loves reading, traveling, and spending time with her family. And so Nancy was the best sort of person in my mind to talk to us about this topic and break it down for us. So without wasting time, welcome, Nancy. How are you?
Thank you. I'm good. Thanks, Loraine. Thank you. I'm very excited to finally make it to Level Up with Loraine. Thanks for having me.
You cannot be more excited than I am. So I've obviously shared a brief profile on who Nancy is, but we will do a deep dive, right, as we explore this topic on building an authentic personal brand. But before we get into that, I would like my listeners to get a brief, snapshot, or at least feel like they know who you are by asking you some rapid, fun, fireside questions. So no pressure. Are you ready?
Sounds good. I'm ready.
Okay, cool. So the first one, what is your most prized possession?
My most prized possession is my faith. My faith in God has taken me through highs and lows, intangible, but it is what I lean on in both good and bad times.
Wow, I love that. I love that. What is the one thing that instantly makes your day better? I can tell you mine is coffee. What's yours?
Seeing my husband in the morning, I often wake up early to work and he's a late riser. So when I hear him coming down the stairs, I smile. It's it brightens my day.
That is so cute. I love that. All right. And summer or winter? So for my listeners, Nancy is from Southern Africa and has recently made the huge move to America. So yeah, obviously there's a bit of weather or differences, right, in the weather.
Mm-hmm.
But summer or winter, and why?
Winter, to be funny enough. I think I'm a homebody, right? And so winter gives me an excuse to stay indoors. Whereas summer, you feel that, I love summer as well, but you feel that added pressure to be outside. So I'd say winter, you can stay in, you can cuddle, you can watch movies, etc. So I love winter.
All right. And what is the biggest risk you've ever taken?
That's a tough one. I would say the biggest risk I've taken is actually relocating. Hey, moving from South Africa, where I was established, to the USA was not easy. It was a risk, but it was a risk well worth it.
And that's already another topic. So get ready to come back.
And I'll be happy.
And talk all things immigration. Okay. And the last one, Who is your biggest inspiration, dead or alive?
My biggest inspiration is my mother. She's still alive. She raised my sisters and I. My father passed away when I was a teenager, and she really fought to educate my sisters and I. And I'll tell you guys a little bit more about it. But she's my idol, just her persistence and resilience.
Awesome. So let me just set this context for the listeners. And we're talking personal branding and why Nancy. So how I met Nancy was in Cape Town. Very randomly, she was part of a group or a network of chartered accountants. I had a very good friend who was a CA herself, and they would have different activities. And for someone who's in HR, it was very random for me. I would always tag along. I'd always tag along. And, also found myself becoming part of this network. And I got so much out of it, despite the fact that I wasn't a CA. And most of the ladies that I connected with, one of them being you, are still part of my life, are still adding value, are still opening doors and exposing me to opportunities I probably would have never been exposed to if I hadn't met them. So I thought you would be the best person. That little summary I've given, plus the profile that I've already shared on who you are the best placed person to talk about building an authentic brand. So maybe let's start with you telling us, what is it, right? What is your definition of or understanding of what personal branding is?
So to me, I remember when I first met you at that networking event, and I asked you, are you an accountant? And you're like, no, I'm in HR. But yeah, as you say, I think there's value in networking right outside of your core. But yeah, personal branding for me is just a holistic view of oneself, right? What do you as a person stand for? What are you known for in your personal life, in your professional life, and in your social life? So it transcends across those three spheres. It's not limited to your professional life. I think, people make the mistake of thinking personal is your professional brand. Personal brand is your professional brand. It's really just an accumulation of all your experiences, your skills, and your values, which is most important, right? That make you who you are and differentiate you from other people. That's how I view personal brand.
All right. And knowing what you know, having risen through the ranks, right, at work, and also having a pretty, solid personal social life, do you think you need a personal brand to be able to succeed in your career, in your business, or any other opportunities?
Yes. I think a personal brand is a powerful representation of who you are. And it becomes more relevant, right? As you rise up, as you mentioned, as you rise up in the organization, you truly realize how important it is to be known as someone who stands for something, right? Especially as a leader, etc. Because that is when you're now leading with influence, and you have to be mindful, of the message that you're putting across. So I think even as a business owner, right? It's also, what do you stand for? What does your business stand for? That's what builds your reputation, right? And attracts customers to you. So very, very important aspect. And it is a journey. It's not a destination, this concept of personal branding.
Yeah. And what makes a strong personal brand?
What makes a strong personal brand, I would say, is, just understanding yourself, knowing who you are, right, as a person, where you want to be, establishing those goals, right, for your career, your extracurricular activities, as we're talking about social life, your networking goals as well. You can have networking goals, believe it or not. And then just understanding the difference between micro and big goals. I think a lot of us have these ambitious goals, which is great, right? But I think we also need to step back and be realistic with ourselves and have micro goals and really understand what does it take to get there. What also makes a strong personal brand is just, knowing you need to be able to constantly evaluate yourself, right? It takes a lot of intentionality with self-introspection. I call it chickens or self-dialogue, but every quarter, as an example, right? Find a spot, play some soft music, whatever makes you tick or gets you into a deep zone, and question yourself on what have you done, right, against your micro goals. why did you not get it done, right? And what do you need to achieve it? So it's just about knowing yourself, being honest with yourself, setting those goals for yourself, and then consistency. I mentioned checking on yourself periodically. That displays consistency, right? And so everyone knows consistency is the most powerful ingredient to succeed in anything, right? And so it equally applies when you're building a strong personal brand.
I am so chuffed that you brought up consistency, because I've just recorded an episode called 5 Keys, or My 5 Keys to Consistency. And I've been trying to build a personal brand outside of Loraine, the HR professional, definitely leveraging off of it, but trying to do something authentic to who I am. And some of the things have been starting this podcast, right? And these are some of those micro goals to something bigger. So I'm really chuffed that you brought that up, and can really relate to what you're saying. So Nancy, tell us your story, right? Tell us your story around how you crafted or envisioned your brand and how you achieved it. What were the investments you made in that journey? What were some of the highs, the lows, the hurdles that you had to get through? Just tell us your story.
Good question. It's a good, very, very loaded question, Loraine.
I know.
My personal journey has been, quite an interesting one. I was born and raised in a middle class family in Harare. I attended a convent school from primary to high school, and I'd say that much of what has shaped my story and me today as a person, in fact, is the values that my father and my mother instilled in me, right? And that's where it starts in building your personal brand. From a very young age, the values of faith, as I mentioned, and faith meaning believing that the sky is the limit. My father always used to say that, right? As well as my faith in God. Hard work, equally important, the value of education. So little story around that is my father knew, the society that he was raising his 5 daughters in. I have four siblings. As you know, the girl child and women, we're historically second-class citizens, right, in society. And so one of the things that he always used to say to me and my sisters was, education is your greatest asset, and no one can take that away from you. And again, that's been an important ingredient, right, to my personal brand. And so from a very young age, I was made aware of just the importance of education as a girl child. I had the tangible proof, right, through my parents' stories and how it can ultimately just contribute to financial freedom, right, which we all aspire to. And so as I set out in South Africa, as a very bright-eyed and bushy-tailed 18-year-old at UCT, I had one goal in mind, right? And that was to get that final paper, my degree in accounting. And the need to do this, as I mentioned earlier, was just amplified by the fact that my father had passed away when I was 15. My mother had sacrificed a lot to be there, for me to be there, and as well as for my sisters as well to get that tertiary education. And so she was really living out my dad's wishes, right, for us to be educated. And so I was very aware that people were watching my mother and asking, how is she going to do all of this with 5 children, right, alone? So little did I know that in those first few years of university, that my ambition, my hunger to just prove the critics wrong and to make my mother and my late father proud and to have that education, right, was going to be a large player in building my personal brand. So when I look back then, as much as I was unaware of it at that point, right, I see that the very first investment in my personal brand was my ambition and truly just understanding who I was, where I was coming from, and what I wanted, right? And this is why it just shows you how your personal brand is so intertwined or inseparable, if I can call it, from your personal experiences, right? And relationships and the values that you grew knowing up, etc. And so, I went on with my journey to being a chartered accountant, and after I graduated, and so starting out on my training contract and embarking on those difficult CA board exams, as you know, Loraine, I soon realized that, persistence was a key ingredient to my personal brand. So not taking no for an answer. When I had to retake my board exam, I embraced it, right? And when all was said and done and I got my CA, that is the point when I realized that failure actually builds character and resilience and is a ladder to success, right? If you truly just embrace it and try again, but a different way, right? And that's what we know today as this concept of a growth mindset, learning from failures, right? Embracing failures, etc. That is a very powerful ingredient to building a personal brand. And so now on the work front, which is equally important, I'd started my articles and, I mentioned earlier that hard work was one of the values that I grew up seeing in my parents and modeling. And so I soon learned in my first few years of working in the audit firm that this notion of hard work got me recognition, right? It was something that came easy to me because it was instilled in me, right? But, and so what I didn't realize again is that that was the beginning of me generating this term that I love and I share with everyone that I mentor, which is called performance currency, which is a key aspect to building your personal brand, particularly earlier on in your career. I encourage you to watch a video called Performance Currency by an amazing, amazing lady called Carla Harris. She's a board member at the company I work for. And she highlights 3 benefits of performance currency earlier on in your career, which is being noticed, as we all know, if you work hard, recognition, promotions, and then attracting sponsors, which I underestimated, right, at that point. Again, all of this, Loraine, is coming as realizations, right? Now that I look back at my journey, but in the moment, you don't realize it, right? So looking at my professional journey again, as I phased out of the audit field, I joined corporate just over 8 years ago. And I realized that, as I reached this mid-career point, I attracted sponsors, as Carla Harris refers to them, people who recognize my work, people who acknowledge my story, right? And wanted to continue to invest in me and my development, And I think as I developed sponsors, as they advocated for me, I grew that network. That's so important as well to building your personal brand beyond your manager, right? I was now accountable to this network because they were my voice. They were speaking for me in forums that I wasn't privy to, right? And so because I was aware of all this, I know at that point, I was now aware of all these sponsors, people who believed in me. I knew that consistency, as I mentioned earlier on, was going to be a key ingredient. I needed to be consistent so that I can keep making them proud, right?
Yeah.
And so I was fortunate enough to rise to leadership roles through my hard work, through sponsors, through great managers. I've been fortunate to have great managers. And as I rose, as a leader, I experienced leadership dilemmas, led diverse teams across Africa, Middle East, and then globally. I can say that 3 things further molded my personal brand, and the respect and the brand I have as a leader. My personal brand is built around leadership. And I never knew it would be built around leadership. I thought it would always be accounting, right? But it's really around leadership because that's what makes me tick. The first one was authenticity, as you mentioned, on just being consistent, not only in my work, but how I show up as a leader at work. So making my values and what I stand for at home transcend to what I stand for in the work environment. So a lot of courageous leadership involved, Loraine, but very rewarding, right? To say the least. And so when I look at what makes me tick in my personal life, it's aspects like diversity and inclusion, because I grew up with 4 sisters and, my dad made us very aware of the dilemmas that the girl child experiences. I'm passionate about coaching and developing others because of my own journey, right? People have invested in me, so I want to lift and rise, right? So it was just really realizing that performance currency was just the foundation and it wasn't enough. Because at some point, I mentioned Carla Harris's video. At some point, people expect you to perform as a high performer. And so it stops. It's like, okay, she's a high performer, she's a high performer. You've reached your plateau, right? Absolutely. So, which is why I say personal brand is an ongoing journey. And then the second one that molded my personal brand is continuous improvement, a growth mindset, investing in yourself, investing in your niche. Finding your niche is so important for your personal brand, right? It builds that consistency as well. I know, we all want to experience different things, but really just honing in on my expertise is risk management, corporate governance, etc. That built my brand as an expert in that field. And it helped me to demand that respect, right? Expert respect, if you can put it that, beyond my leadership. And so it's also a journey I've continued, just a commitment to lifelong learning. Again, product of what my father brought me up, knowing and believing in, right?
Yeah.
And I think it helps you show up the best version of yourself to other people in any environment. Then the last but not least is relationship currency. Very, very important. So as you mentioned networking at the beginning, I was glad you mentioned that. But I always say that networking is important, but it has to be effective networking. You don't just have one conversation and think that you've created a network, right? It's also a career mistake I made, right? When I just started becoming a leader, just doesn't take one conversation. You have to be invested in that relationship, as painful or as introverted as you are, which I hear from a lot of my mentees, as in your personal life, with your marriage, right? With your family, with your relationships, friendships, right? It takes time, it takes effort. You hang out, you nurture those relationships. You have to do the same thing in the work environment to build that level of trust with your stakeholders or sponsors, etc. So that relationship currency becomes more important as you become more senior, right? It's that intangible aspect, that value that you create in your portfolio through connecting with people and just nurturing the relationships with those people, and having multiple voices is important, as you rise up in the organization.
Wow.
So yeah, that's what I would, hopefully I've summarized it in a nutshell.
You have done an amazing job. You are such an impressive, inspirational woman, Nancy. When you were speaking, I was just like, wow. And I was writing notes and, trying to capture all of it. But two things that I want to ask you, right? Particularly on the sponsorship, network, relationship currency. To your point, a lot of people ask me, usually ask me, I'm an introvert. You're an extrovert, Loraine, right? So it's very easy for you to build relationships. Can you tell me step by step or, exactly what I can do to build that network, to foster those relationships that will have people, fight for me behind closed doors, like you said earlier. So are you, Nancy, an introvert or an extrovert?
I'm an ambivert. So I'm a mix of both, right? So I love, being in social scenarios excites me, etc. But I also like my quiet moments. So I would call myself an ambivert.
Yeah.
But I feel the pain because, it's sometimes I just want to be alone and I don't want to have to deal with networking, right?
I know.
But look, it's a part of growth, Loraine. It's part of that growth mindset of taking yourself out of your comfort zone. That's what I share with a lot of my mentees that say that they're introverts, right? You want to get ahead in this organization, right?
Yeah.
You have to put in the work, right? It's part of the investment that you have to put in. That relationship currency is critical, right? I always say that on its own, relationship currency will not work, right? The mistake people make is sometimes they think that, relationships will get me where I want to be. No. Relationship currency on its own is not enough. It needs to be paired up with performance currency for it to be effective. I don't know if that makes sense. And so I would encourage people to take it as a growth mindset issue. You need to get out of your comfort zone. And what I typically do, or how I typically get over this uncomfortable, I feel like it's uncomfortable for a lot of people, right, to just go speak. But I think it just takes you getting one sponsor and asking that sponsor to link you up with leaders in the organization, to introduce you to leaders. That's how it's happened for me, right? Introduce you to leaders in the work environment. I think that creates a little bit of ease, I think. Sorry, as you, it removes the burden of you reaching out to leaders by yourself. That would be my advice. So find one person that can, who can link you up to other leaders in the organization. Do those little introductions, right? So that you're inducted. It's a soft landing, at least when you start interacting with these people. So there are ways to do it, right? And as you network, you need to make sure that you've got set discussion agendas. Always preparing for the conversation helps, Loraine. I think it becomes uncomfortable. I certainly have people who've come and networked with me, right? Now that I'm a senior leader, but it becomes uncomfortable when there's no set agenda. So plan it out, right? Get help from that sponsor to plan out your conversation, or series of conversations, right? With the leader that you're networking with. So there's various ways of doing it. If you're an introvert, but people like you and me could probably just go into a conversation without planning and just talk and talk and talk. Right?
Absolutely.
So so it just differs. But it's about planning and getting out of your comfort zone and planning the approach.
Awesome. And one of the things you spoke about in building this personal brand for yourself is a journey or a continuous learning journey. what are some of the things you had to invest in? So practical examples for you to build your brand. And, when you talk about learning, it means you also need to unlearn some stuff, right? I mean, if I think about you being an accountant, there's a lot of structure there. And then you honing in to leadership or leaning into leadership, there's sort of having to let go of some structure, right? And being able to embrace situations and craft sort of personalized solutions for people and move away from the structure. So talk to me about, firstly, some of those learning investments you had to do for yourself and some of the things you needed to unlearn, right, as you morphed into this leadership focus.
I think I'll speak to my investment in education. You mentioned, just because you mentioned the accountant and how we're typically viewed and the structure, etc. I recall I've done my MBA, as you know, and I recall at that time, it was really just about creating a little bit more open-mindedness, right, on my part, right, and because my ultimate aspiration is to be in operations, etc. And so just I would say, matching the experience, the practical experience that you're getting on the job with learning, with further learning or continuous learning is important. I think you as much as you get practical experience, you can't stop investing in education. I remember with my MBA as an example. As you know, an MBA is very, very costly, and at that point, I didn't even have funds, but I made ends meet, right? Because I knew this was what was going to set me apart as a CA, at that point. So it's making those sacrifices, be willing to make current sacrifices for future gains, right? I think that's what's important. Continuous learning is something that I've had to commit. Lifelong learning is what I've committed myself to, right? I'm doing my PhD now as well. But I've realized that the more I learn from a theoretical perspective, the more I'm able to approach my job, in the best way possible, if I can put it like that. Especially from a leadership perspective. My MBA was also something that I really wanted to do because I knew I was going into that next stage of my career, which was leadership as well. Aside from the technical skills of accounting that I had, it was also just that leadership aspect that I was now entering, and I knew I needed to advance from being a doer, right, an accountant or an analyst as I was back then, to thinking more strategically, right? And so it was just matching that learning and fighting for it and making the sacrifices, right? The financial sacrifice back then, as painful as it was, I can see the gains now, right, from doing that. So I think it's that, and then I'd probably say, just again, I'll bring up the networking issue. I had to unlearn the fact that, performance was enough, because performance was not enough. I had to learn that I needed relationships to further grow in my career, right? And so, just like I mentioned earlier, getting out of my comfort zone. I was comfortable, Loraine, right, with doing my job and thinking, okay, I've done my job. People should be happy. I've even gone the extra mile. But at some point, it doesn't, take you further. So just unlearning that and switching to the zone of networking, finding people who can, speak for me at those tables that I'm not there at, and also realizing that, when you're building those relationships, it's about building the trust with them so that they can speak for you, right? At those tables, you need to have a relationship. You can't just speak to someone once and expect they'll speak for you. You need to have that relationship with them. Being open. I was very open in my earlier career to doing tasks for people that weren't in my department. I was very open to that. But that's also built credibility with me, right? Doing a task for a general manager, as an example. It's not in finance, but I did something for you, right? And you can see my work ethic. And so you can also speak for me, even though you're not in finance, when you're at that table. Yeah. So it's just also that open-mindedness was important.
All right. So what I'm hearing is it does cost, right, to build a personal brand, whether it's money or funds to further learn, or relationships, taking time to build those relationships, taking time to attend those extra classes, resources, etc. And so you have to be willing to invest in yourself. Am I right?
Yes, correct.
And what goes into creating a unique brand? Because I mean, there's 101 leaders, right? But what would differentiate Nancy from Joe? Right? What is that? How does someone craft a unique brand? Even when you are in a world that is flooded with podcasters, flooded with leaders, flooded with whatever it is that your niche or your speciality is.
I would say for me, the one thing for me is just being true to myself, right? Because there is only one Nancy, right? And that shines. When you're truly who you are, it shines. People can see it. So be consistent with what you fight for and stand for, staying true to your values, right? People can see your values shine through you in the way that you behave and, the way you address situations at work. Don't go left just because others are going left. That's a lesson that I learned very early on in my career, right? Don't go left just because others are going. Be okay with not, being part of the status quo, and so I think just that it builds your authenticity as well. The more you're consistent, between who you are at home and who you are at work, and just people then see us as people are attracted naturally to people who behave consistently, right? So the more you're consistent, the more authentic you become, and it also comes hand in hand with being vulnerable, right? Being as leaders, I think often you feel like you must be strong, you must be authoritative. No, it also borders on being vulnerable with who you truly are to the people that you lead. So I would say that's been my biggest lesson as a leader. And I think it also gives you that respect from senior leaders, respect from people you lead and your peers.
Yeah. You spoke about expert currency. Was it expert currency?
Yes.
Or expert respect, right? And how do you become an authority? So how do you become an authority outside of, your workplace or outside of where you've built those relationships, where your brand can be carried outside of your workplace? Does that make sense? So
that makes sense. Yeah. That makes sense. I would say that you need to seek opportunities outside. Volunteer opportunities are the best way to do it, right? So I've done it through board memberships, etc. It was the best way I could expand my passion, whether it was coaching and mentorship or whether it's sharing my expertise, right, as a risk manager back then. It's how I've extended my personal brand outside of the organization. One thing that we need to learn is that your personal brand, as much as it's built, with the organization you're working for, it must also be independent from the organization you're working for. So try and get into volunteer activities outside, whether it's as nonprofits, even not as a board member, right? Start off just volunteering. That builds your portfolio and your expertise.
Awesome. And can you share with us some of the mistakes people make with personal branding? Some of the personal branding mistakes you've seen?
Sure, I can share a few just off the top of my head. Mentioned them earlier as well, but I think the first one is thinking that relationships will get you places. Just having relationships, it must be matched with your performance, right? You must have some sort of credibility in terms of the actual practical work and work outputs that you've been producing in your organization. The second one is not establishing an expertise interest or an interest area early enough. The sooner you can find the area you are interested in, the more you can build onto that and build, just puff up your personal brand, right? With what is Nancy good at, right? Everyone knows Nancy's good at risk management, as an example, or accounting, right? So honing in on that expertise is important. And then just thinking that personal branding is one-dimensional. It is multidimensional. It extends to your interest outside of work, and you can build your personal brand outside of work. I think that's one area people need to realize. And then just abandoning continuous learning is also a pitfall. The world is changing. So just building your career capital is important. New skills and expertise in your field will be important to keep working on.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This has been great. And I believe we're going to have many more conversations in the future, right? Where we even deep dive on some of the things you raised, whether it's relationship currency and, we go deeper with regards to that, or embracing failures, or performance currency. But I think this was a great sort of good start for us to do a broad understanding of what personal branding is and what goes into it. So if I'm to summarize my key takeaways, and I may miss one or two, but I think what's really important and the things that you really sort of emphasized are values are important, understanding your values from the beginning, because that sort of informs your brand, having clarity on ambition and brand that you want to achieve, authenticity, remaining authentic to who you are, embracing failures, performance currency, which is equally as important as relationship currency, finding your niche, consistency, and that personal brand is continuous learning. Are there any other closing remarks or additions that you want to leave my listeners with?
No, you've captured it well, Loraine. Thank you. You've captured it quite well.
Awesome. So before I let you go, I always ask my guests, right? It can be to do with this topic or any topic. What book or movie or podcast would you recommend that is, that you have found useful, Nancy?
Off the top of my head, I recently read a book, so I'll refer to that. But the book is called Bet on You, right? By Angie Morgan and Courtney Lynch. It's really a book that focuses on how you can win with risk-taking, taking the risk on yourself and demonstrating to others that you're taking a risk on yourself, right?
Yeah.
And in that way, kind of prompt people to take a risk on you. So I'd encourage people to read on that. I think risk-taking becomes more important, even more important as you build your personal brand, right? Branching into areas that you're not familiar with, getting new skills, etc. So yeah, I would definitely encourage people to read that book.
Awesome. And you also mentioned Performance Currency. I'm definitely going to look for this one by Carla Harris, you say?
Carla Harris. Yes, please do. Very short video, but it's great. It's really great.
Awesome. And to wrap up, if you are comfortable, what other projects can you share that you'd love the listeners maybe to hop onto, to get to know you a bit more, to engage with your work, or social media? It could be your LinkedIn. Where can they find you if they want to, connect with you?
I would encourage people to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm always on LinkedIn, and just keep up with me, connect with me if you want to talk about your career. I'm open to informal and formal mentorship. As I said, it's a passion of mine, coaching and mentorship. And so LinkedIn will be the best place to see me and the activity.
Awesome. And your name is as it is, Nancy.
As is.
Okay, awesome.
Chakabuda, yes, as is.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm honestly honored. I don't take this for granted. We are continents apart. And you made
Thanks
time
so much
for mere old me. And I really, really, really respect you. You inspire me so much.
You.
I am grinning so much at the end of this show. God bless you, Nancy. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Right. I appreciate it. Thank you.
And to all my listeners, there you have it. That's how you build an authentic personal brand. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please share it with your friends, share a review. Until next time, continue to level up.